There is a land that was designed to be eternal, a civilization that built its temples to withstand the end of the world. They carved their covenants with the gods into stone, erected obelisks that touched the sky, and declared themselves invincible against time itself. But there was a man, over 2,500 years ago, who looked at those same stones and uttered something impossible. It was not a wish. It was not a curse born of hatred. It was a prophecy so precise, so clinically detailed, that it defied all logic. He said that Egypt, the immortal colossus, would become a shadow, that its cities would be ruins inhabited by foreigners, that the Nile, its backbone, would dry up into dust, that its gods would be forgotten and its temples silent. And the most unsettling of all, that Egypt would never again be governed by Egyptians. That man was called Ezekiel, and every word he uttered is coming true before your eyes. The first time you hear this prophecy, it sounds like apocalyptic poetry, biblical language designed to scare, to moralize, to control. But when you place Ezekiel's words alongside a historical map, archaeological data, modern demographic statistics, something breaks in your understanding of what is possible. Because we are not talking about vague predictions about good and evil. We are talking about geographic coordinates, names of specific cities, details about trade, about dynasties, about the fate of stone structures that had not yet fallen when he spoke. And the most disturbing, we are talking about a sentence that is still being carried out silently in the 21st century. Ezekiel was a Jewish priest exiled in Babylon. It was the year 593 BC. His people had been torn from Jerusalem and taken in chains to a foreign land. They were broken, humiliated. And in the midst of this exile, Ezekiel began to have visions. They were not vague dreams. They were visceral, detailed experiences that left him trembling. And one of these visions was about Egypt, the superpower of the ancient world, the land that had enslaved his ancestors, the empire that seemed untouchable. The prophecy begins with a statement that sounds absurd. Ezekiel says that God is against the Pharaoh of Egypt, against the great monster lying in the midst of its rivers. He calls the Pharaoh a dragon, a leviathan, a creature that has declared itself the creator of the Nile itself. And then comes the sentence: Egypt will be handed over to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Its cities will be looted, its land will be desolate for 40 years. But that is only the beginning. After those 40 years, Egypt will be restored. But it will never again be what it was. It will be the lowest of kingdoms. It will never exalt itself above the nations again. And here comes the line that breaks all historical logic. There will never again be an Egyptian prince who rules over Egypt. When Ezekiel uttered these words, Egypt had over 2,000 years of uninterrupted dynastic history. They had survived invasions, famines, internal collapses. They always rebounded. They always resurfaced. The idea that Egypt would cease to be governed by Egyptians was like saying the sun would stop rising. It was a structural impossibility. And yet, Ezekiel not only said it, he detailed it. The prophecy continues with a list of cities. They are not generic cities. They are specific names. Memphis, the ancient capital. Pithom in Upper Egypt. Zoan in the Delta. Taphnes, Sin, Thebes. Each receives its own verdict. Memphis will be filled with daily anguish. Pithom will be consumed by fire. Sin, Egypt's fortress, will be destroyed. Thebes, the city of the 100 gates, will be torn apart. And all of this is not poetic language. It is an itinerary of destruction. Now then, if you were a rational skeptic in the year 590 before Christ, what would you have thought? You would have thought that Ezekiel was delusional. Because Egypt was not only powerful, it was the standard of civilization. When Rome was still a shepherd's village, Egypt already had libraries, irrigation systems, monuments defying gravity. The idea that all of that would crumble was not only unlikely, it was ridiculous. But then the impossible happened. In the year 568 before Christ, Nebuchadnezzar invaded Egypt. Historical records confirm this. It is not biblical mythology, it is verifiable history. The Babylonian army ravaged the Nile Delta. The cities mentioned by Ezekiel were looted. Memphis, the jewel of the kingdom, was devastated. And for decades, Egypt was plunged into chaos. It was not a quick fall. It was a slow bleeding out. When it finally stabilized, something had changed in its essence. But this is where history becomes chilling, because the prophecy did not end with the Babylonian invasion. That was just the trigger. The true sentence was about Egypt's eternal future. And that sentence said, "Never again will an Egyptian rule Egypt. Never again will it be an exalted nation. It will be the lowest of kingdoms." After the Babylonian invasion, Egypt was conquered by the Persians in 525 BC. The Persian Empire installed its own governors. Native Egyptian pharaohs attempted to rebel several times. There were brief periods of independence, ephemeral dynasties, but they were shadows of what had been. And then Alexander the Great arrived in 332 BC. The Greeks took control. The Ptolemaic dynasty, of Macedonian origin, ruled Egypt for 300 years. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, had Greek blood, not Egyptian. When Cleopatra died in the year 30 BC, Egypt became a Roman province. And since then, for more than 2,000 years, Egypt has never been governed by a native Egyptian. The Romans controlled it, then the Byzantines, then the Arabs in the 7th century, then the Ottoman Turks, then the British. When Egypt finally gained nominal independence in the 20th century, its leaders were descendants of conquerors. Muhammad Ali, the founder of modern Egypt, was Albanian. Gamal Abdel Nasser, the nationalist hero, had Arab ancestry. Hosni Mubarak, Anwar Sadat, all of them represented the legacy of ancient invaders, not the unbroken line of the pharaohs. And here is the detail that no one wants to confront. The Copts, the only direct descendants of the ancient Egyptians, are a persecuted minority in their own land. They speak a language derived from ancient Egyptian. They preserve traditions that date back to the pharaohs, but they are treated as foreigners in the country their ancestors built. They do not govern. They do not control. They survive on the margins. The prophecy of Ezekiel not only predicted an invasion, it predicted a permanent reconfiguration of national identity. And that is what makes this so disturbing, because we are not talking about a one-time event. We are talking about a perpetual condition. But there is more. Ezekiel also spoke of the Nile. He said that the rivers of Egypt would dry up, that the water would turn to desert, that the land would become desolate. For centuries, this also sounded impossible. The Nile was eternal. It was the source of life. Egypt without the Nile was like a body without blood. And yet today, the Nile is dying. Not metaphorically, literally. The construction of the Aswan Dam in 1960 changed the river's flow forever. The sediments that used to fertilize the valley no longer arrive. Soil salinization is turning fertile lands into desert. And now, Ethiopia is building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which will divert billions of cubic meters of water. Experts warn that this could reduce the Nile's flow in Egypt by up to 25%. The consequences would be catastrophic. Famines, mass migrations, agricultural collapse. The Egyptian government knows it. It has threatened war if Ethiopia fills the dam too quickly. But the reality is that Egypt no longer has the power to impose its will. It is no longer a superpower. It is a fragile state, dependent on food imports, with a shaky economy and a population growing faster than it can sustain. It is exactly what Ezekiel described, the lowest of the kingdoms. And then there are the cities. Memphis, the city that Ezekiel said would be filled with daily distress, is today a field of ruins. Tourists walk among fragments of fallen statues. There is no life there, only dust and silence. Thebes, the city of magnificent temples, is now Luxor, a tourist trap where the descendants of the pharaohs sell trinkets to foreigners. Ptolemais, in Upper Egypt, is a forgotten, impoverished region with no political or economic relevance. But the most unsettling thing is not what has fallen. It is what was never rebuilt. Ezekiel said that Egypt would be restored, but it would never be what it was. And that is exactly what has happened. Egypt exists. It has a government. It has institutions, but it has no glory. It lacks the cultural weight it had for 3,000 years. It is a relic of itself, a living museum run by others. And here, we must ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. Is this a coincidence? Is it possible that all these specific predictions, made 2,600 years ago, have been fulfilled purely by chance? The odds are astronomical. We are not talking about one or two vague predictions. We are talking about a dozen precise, verifiable details that have been fulfilled over millennia. The skeptics will say that biblical prophecies are self-fulfilling, that the people who believe in them make them come true. But that argument doesn't work here, because the Persians who conquered Egypt were not fulfilling Ezekiel. The Greeks who established the Ptolemaic dynasty were not reading Hebrew texts. The Arabs who Islamized Egypt in the 7th century were not following a biblical script. All of them acted in their own interests, driven by their own ambition, without knowing they were fulfilling an ancient prophecy. And that is what makes this so disturbing. Because if Ezekiel's words have been fulfilled without the conscious intervention of anyone, then we are faced with one of two possibilities. Either Ezekiel had access to information that no human should have, or there is something operating in history that is beyond our understanding. The most comfortable answer is to dismiss all of this, to say that it is mythology, that it is forced interpretation, that we are seeing patterns where there are none. But that comfort requires ignoring data. It requires closing one's eyes to verifiable historical records. It requires pretending that Egypt's current condition is normal, when all the ancient contemporary empires, Persia, Greece, Rome, have seen the resurgence of nations within their territories. Iran is governed by Iranians, Greece by Greeks, Italy by Italians. But Egypt, the oldest of all, remains under the rule of descendants of invaders. And it is not just Egypt. Ezekiel also prophesied about other nations. He spoke of Tyre, the great Phoenician city, and said it would be destroyed and never rebuilt. Alexander the Great razed Tyre in 332 BC. Today, the ancient site of Tyre is an empty peninsula. Fishermen lay their nets where palaces once stood. It was never rebuilt. He spoke of Sidon, another Phoenician city, and said that it would be punished but not destroyed. Sidon was repeatedly looted throughout history, but it always survived. Today, it remains a populated city in Lebanon. He spoke of Edom, the kingdom south of Judah, and said that it would remain desolate forever. Edom disappeared from history. Its capital, Petra, is today a dead city carved into red rock, visited only by tourists. Each of these prophecies was fulfilled with surgical precision, and the only remaining rational explanation is that Ezekiel was not guessing. He was seeing. But let's go back to Egypt, because the prophecy is not over. There are still lines that have not been fully fulfilled. Ezekiel spoke of a desolation of 40 years, and that happened after the Babylonian invasion. But he also spoke of a final judgment, of a moment when Egypt would know that there is a God who judges. And that part remains future. What we are seeing today is slow-motion compliance. The Nile is drying up. The land is impoverishing. The population is growing uncontrollably while resources diminish. The government is authoritarian, corrupt, incapable of solving fundamental problems. And Egyptian identity, that connection with the pharaohs, with the pyramid builders, has become a tourist fantasy. Modern Egyptians do not see themselves as heirs of Ramses or Tutankhamun. They see themselves as Arabs, Muslims, part of the Islamic world. The connection with their pharaonic past is broken, and that is what Ezekiel saw. Not just the fall of an empire, the death of an identity, the transformation of a civilization into a shadow of itself. But there is something deeper here, something that goes beyond Egypt. Because if a prophecy from 2,600 years ago is being fulfilled with this precision, what other prophecies are in motion? What other judgments, what other destinies are written, waiting for their moment? Most people live as if history is random, as if events simply happen without pattern, without purpose, without design. But Ezekiel's prophecy suggests something radically different. It suggests that history has an author, that empires do not fall by accident, that nations do not rise and fall according to the laws of chance. It suggests that there is a will, operating, patient, relentless, moving the pieces over centuries. And if that is true, then the question is not whether the prophecies will come true. The question is, where are you on this board? Are you a pawn? Are you a spectator? Or are you someone who has begun to see the pattern? Because the fulfillment of the prophecy about Egypt is not just a historical fact. It is a warning. It is a demonstration that when judgment is pronounced, no matter how powerful you are, how ancient your glory, how indestructible your monuments seem, time executes the sentence. Always. And Egypt was not judged for being the most wicked of empires. It was judged for arrogance, for declaring itself self-sufficient. for believing that the Nile was its creation, that its glory was eternal, that they did not need to answer to anything beyond themselves. And that arrogance was punished in the cruelest way possible. Not with annihilation, not with forgetfulness, but with perpetual humiliation, with existence without glory, with memory without power. Today, when an Egyptian looks at the pyramids, he does not see the symbol of his own greatness. He sees the symbol of a lost greatness. He sees what was and will never be again. And that is a curse deeper than destruction, because destruction frees you. But humiliation binds you to your own shame. And this brings us to the mirror, because we are not just talking about Egypt. We are talking about any system, any nation, any person who declares themselves invincible, who builds their monuments believing they are eternal, who looks at their achievements and concludes that there is nothing greater than them. Western civilization built cathedrals and thought that God would bless them forever. Today, those cathedrals are museums. The Soviet Union built an empire that promised to be eternal. It collapsed in a decade. European colonial empires dominated the world for centuries. Today they are middle powers struggling for relevance. And perhaps at this very moment, you are also building something. A career, an identity, a vision of yourself that you believe is indestructible. And perhaps, like the pharaohs, you have begun to believe that your Nile will never dry up, that your power will never diminish, that your glory is permanent. But Ezekiel has been watching you for 2,600 years, and he is telling you, check your foundations, because if they are built on arrogance, on self-sufficiency, on the illusion that you are the author of your own story, then your fall is already written. Not today, not tomorrow, but inexorably, like Egypt, like Tyre, like all who believed they were the exception. And when that day comes, when your monuments turn to dust, and your name is just a footnote in someone else's history, what will be left of you? Will you be remembered as someone who built on rock, or as someone who built on sand, believing it was stone? The prophecy of Egypt is not just about Egypt. It is about the universal law that no empire, no person can break. The law that everything exalted will be humbled, and everything humbled, eventually, will be exalted. The final question is simple. Which side of that law are you living on?